The blood on Delilah Crawford's hands had been washed away 3 years ago, but the stains on her reputation would never fade, or so the people of Carlin, Nevada believed with an almost religious fervor. Samuel Yates heard the whispers before he ever laid eyes on her. Warnings delivered in hushed tones over whiskey-stained bar tops and across dusty mercantile counters, each person in town seemingly convinced that they alone possessed the moral authority to save him from making a terrible mistake. The year was 1882, and Samuel had ridden into Carlin with nothing but a bedroll, a tired horse, and the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from watching too many friends die for causes that stopped mattering the moment the bullets started flying. He had been a ranch hand down in Arizona Territory before deciding that the dry heat and endless cattle drives were slowly killing whatever remained of his spirit. At 26 years old, Samuel figured he had enough time left to build something of his own. Maybe find a piece of land where he could raise horses instead of nursing along half-dead steers across unforgiving desert. Carlin seemed as good a place as any to start fresh, a small railroad town nestled in the high desert of northern Nevada, where the wind carried the smell of sage and the promise of hard work rewarded with honest pay. The first warning came from the livery owner, a grizzled man named Pete who had more opinions than teeth. Samuel was settling his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Rusty, when Pete leaned against the stall door and spat tobacco juice into the hay-strewn floor. "You looking for work, young man? You best keep your head down and your eyes forward. We got ourselves some decent folk here, but we also got temptation walking around in widow's weeds." Samuel brushed Rusty's flank and didn't look up. "That's so." "Delilah Crawford. Lost her husband 3 years back. And there's those who say she had a hand in it." Pete's voice dropped to a theatrical whisper. "Thomas Crawford was a good man. Worked at the railway office, never gave nobody trouble. Then one day he turns up dead in their house, and she's standing there cool as you please, saying he must have fallen and hit his head." "Must have been hard for her," Samuel said, because he had learned long ago that the easiest way to handle gossip was to deflect it with basic human decency. Pete made a dismissive sound. "Hard for her. She was out of mourning clothes faster than a jackrabbit runs from a coyote. Got herself that little dress shop on Main Street. Acts like she's some kind of businesswoman. Ain't natural. A woman living alone like that, running her own affairs. Mark my words, she's trouble." Samuel finished with Rusty and paid Pete for 3 nights of boarding, adding an extra coin because the man looked like he needed it more than the gossip needed encouragement. He stepped out into the afternoon sun, squinting against the brightness that seemed to bleach the color out of everything except the endless blue sky. Carlin was smaller than he had expected, just a single main street lined with the usual assortment of buildings, a saloon, a general store, a bank that looked too grand for the town size, and near the end of the street, a small shop with lace curtains in the window and a hand-painted sign that read "Crawford's Fine Dressmaking and Alterations." He had not planned to seek her out, had not planned to care one way or another about the town's resident scandal, but something about the way everyone seemed so eager to blacken her name made him curious. Samuel had known enough genuinely bad people in his life to recognize the difference between real evil and small-town boredom dressed up as moral concern. The warnings continued throughout the day. At the general store, the proprietor's wife, a woman with thin lips and suspicious eyes, told him that Delilah Crawford had probably poisoned her husband and was just clever enough to make it look like an accident. At the boarding house where he rented a room, the owner mentioned that Delilah kept strange hours and sometimes received visitors after dark. Though when pressed, she could not name a single person who had actually been seen entering or leaving. At the saloon that evening, a railroad worker bought Samuel a drink and spent 20 minutes explaining that Delilah had refused his marriage proposal 6 months after Thomas died, which proved she was either unnatural or hiding something terrible. By the time Samuel went to bed that first night, he had heard 17 different theories about what had really happened to Thomas Crawford, ranging from the plausible to the absurd. What struck him most was not the variety of the accusations, but the venom with which they were delivered, as if Delilah Crawford's greatest crime was not murder, but the audacity to continue living her life without seeking permission or forgiveness from her neighbors. He saw her for the first time 2 days later. Samuel had found work at the Turner Ranch, 5 miles outside of town, helping to break horses for the coming season. The pay was decent, and the work was the kind he enjoyed, requiring patience and understanding rather than brute force. He had ridden into town to pick up supplies, and as he tied Rusty to the rail outside the general store, he caught sight of a woman walking down the boardwalk with a basket over her arm. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense that men usually meant when they described women in saloons or dime novels. Delilah Crawford was tall and slender, moving with a straight-backed confidence that suggested she was acutely aware of being watched and had decided long ago not to care. Her hair was dark, almost black, pulled back into a practical bun that revealed a face with strong features, high cheekbones, and eyes that seemed to take in everything without revealing anything in return. She wore a simple gray dress that was well made but not ostentatious, the kind of clothing that suggested skill and taste rather than wealth. As she walked, the street seemed to part around her. Women pulled their children closer and turned away. Men stopped their conversations to stare, some with hostility, others with a hunger that made Samuel's jaw tighten. She acknowledged none of it, just kept walking with her head up and her gaze fixed on some point in the distance, as if the whole town were nothing more than a temporary inconvenience she had to navigate. Samuel found himself following her progress until she disappeared into her shop. He stood there longer than necessary, aware that several people were watching him watch her, already forming opinions and preparing warnings. "You best stay clear of that one," the general store owner said when Samuel finally went inside, "and she's got a way of twisting a man's thoughts, making him forget what's right and proper." Samuel bought flour, coffee, and tobacco, then said, "Seems to me a woman's got a right to walk down the street without being treated like a criminal." The store owner's face flushed. "You are new here, so you do not understand. We are trying to help you, son. That woman is dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Samuel asked, genuinely curious now. "Has she hurt someone? Stolen something? What exactly has she done besides exist?" The store owner sputtered, unable to articulate a specific crime, and Samuel left with his supplies, more convinced than ever that whatever had happened 3 years ago, the truth was buried under so many layers of speculation and spite that no one actually knew anything for certain. He thought about Delilah Crawford more than he wanted to admit over the following days. Samuel was not a man given to romantic notions or rescue fantasies. He had seen enough of life to know that people were complicated, and that getting involved in someone else's troubles usually led to acquiring troubles of your own. But there was something about the way the entire town had united in their condemnation of her that bothered him, reminded him too much of mob mentality, and the way people would convince themselves of anything if it meant they could feel superior to someone else. It was a Tuesday morning nearly 2 weeks after his arrival in Carlin, when circumstances forced a meeting between them. Samuel had come into town early to send a telegram to his brother in Arizona, letting him know he had found work and a place to settle for a while. As he left the telegraph office, he nearly collided with Delilah Crawford, who was rushing down the boardwalk with unusual urgency, her face pale and her hands trembling. "Pardon me," she said automatically, then tried to step around him. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked, because she very clearly was not. "I am fine," she said. But her voice was tight and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. She clutched a piece of paper in one hand, crumpled as if she had been gripping it too hard. Samuel stepped aside to let her pass, but before she could continue, 3 women emerged from the dressmaker's shop across the street, their faces set in identical expressions of righteous anger. The one in front, a heavy-set woman in an expensive blue dress, raised her voice loud enough for half the street to hear. "We will not be patronizing your establishment any longer, Mrs. Crawford. It has come to our attention that you have been spreading lies about respectable families in this town." Delilah stopped walking. Her back straightened, and she turned slowly to face her accusers. "I have spread no lies about anyone, Mrs. Henderson. If you are upset about what I told your husband regarding the quality of the fabric he sold me last month, perhaps you should take up your concerns with him rather than attempting to destroy my livelihood." "How dare you?" Mrs. Henderson's face turned an alarming shade of red. You, of all people, accusing others of dishonesty. Everyone knows what you did. You murdered your husband in cold blood and somehow convinced the sheriff to look the other way. Now you poison this town with your presence, and we have had enough. The street had gone quiet. Samuel could feel the attention of every person within earshot focused on the confrontation, waiting to see what would happen next. Delilah's face had gone from pale to white, but her voice remained steady. My husband's death was investigated thoroughly by Sheriff Morrison, by the county coroner, and by anyone else who cared to look. Thomas fell down the stairs in our home and struck his head. It was a tragic accident, and not a day goes by that I do not mourn him. If you have evidence to the contrary, I suggest you present it to the authorities. Otherwise, I would appreciate it if you would keep your speculation to yourself. Speculation? One of the other women chimed in. Everyone knows you were seen arguing with him the day before he died. Everyone knows he had taken out a life insurance policy just 3 months prior. Everyone knows nothing, Samuel heard himself say, stepping forward before he had consciously decided to involve himself. Begging your pardon, ladies, but it seems to me you are throwing around some serious accusations without any proof to back them up. Where I come from, we call that slander, and it is a good way to find yourself on the wrong end of a lawsuit. Mrs. Henderson turned her glare on him. And who might you be? Samuel Yates, madam. I work at the Turner Ranch. I am new to Carlin, which means I do not have any preconceived notions about Mrs. Crawford or anyone else, but I know what a witch hunt looks like. And this sure seems like one. This is none of your concern, Mr. Yates, Mrs. Henderson said coldly. You would do well not to associate yourself with that woman if you hope to have any standing in this community. Well, now that is interesting, Samuel said, feeling his temper start to rise, because it seems to me that a community worth being part of would not spend its time tormenting a widow who has done nothing but try to earn an honest living. But maybe I am wrong. Maybe Carlin is the kind of place that prefers gossip to decency and cruelty to kindness. If that is the case, I will be sure to mention it to Mr. Turner when I get back to the ranch. I am sure he will be interested to hear how the town treats its citizens. The mention of the Turner name changed the atmosphere immediately. Daniel Turner was one of the largest employers in the area, and his opinions carried weight. The three women exchanged uncertain glances, and Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted from righteousness to calculation. We meant no harm, she said stiffly. We were merely expressing our concerns as upstanding members of the community. Then perhaps you could express those concerns somewhere other than the middle of the street, where you are clearly trying to humiliate Mrs. Crawford in front of as many people as possible, Samuel suggested. The women retreated with poor grace, muttering among themselves, but unwilling to continue the confrontation now that Samuel had shifted the dynamics. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, disappointed that the entertainment had ended so abruptly. Samuel turned to find Delilah Crawford staring at him with an expression he could not quite read. Up close, he could see that her eyes were hazel, a complicated mix of green and brown that seemed to shift in the morning light. She was younger than he had initially thought, probably no more than 28 or 29, though there was a weariness in her face that suggested she had lived through more than her years would indicate. You did not have to do that, she said quietly. You have just made yourself a target of every gossip in this town. Seems like I would have been a target anyway, eventually, Samuel replied. People who have that much energy for hating strangers tend not to be too particular about who they hate. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, then disappeared. Nevertheless, I am grateful. That was kind of you, and kindness is in short supply around here. Mrs. Crawford, I hope you do not mind me saying so, but you look like you could use a cup of coffee and maybe something to eat. Is there somewhere we could talk that is not in the middle of the street with half the town listening? She hesitated, and he could see her weighing the consequences. Being seen in his company would only add fuel to the gossip, would give people more ammunition to use against her. But something in her face suggested she was tired of always calculating, always worrying about what people would say. There is a small cafe 2 streets over run by a Chinese family. Most of the respectable people in town will not eat there, which means we are unlikely to be bothered, she said finally. They walked together through Carlin's dusty streets, neither speaking, both aware of the eyes tracking their progress. The cafe was a modest building with clean windows and the smell of cooking oil and ginger wafting from the kitchen. An elderly Chinese woman greeted them with a slight bow and showed them to a table in the corner. Samuel ordered coffee and breakfast for both of them, ignoring Delilah's protest that she was not hungry. When the woman had left them alone, he leaned back in his chair and studied the woman across from him. "I know it is none of my business, he said carefully, "but would you tell me what actually happened to your husband? Not the gossip, not the speculation, the truth." Delilah was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the worn wooden table. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Thomas and I were married for 5 years. He was a good man, truly. He worked for the railroad, kept the books, made sure everything ran smoothly. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. Then about 4 years into our marriage, he started drinking. Not just a glass of whiskey in the evening, but serious drinking. He would come home late, stumbling, sometimes angry, sometimes weeping. I tried to help him, tried to get him to see a doctor, but he refused to admit there was a problem." She paused as the proprietor brought their food, steaming plates of eggs and rice and vegetables that smelled better than anything Samuel had eaten in weeks. Delilah picked at her food, then continued. "The night before he died, we did argue. I told him that if he did not stop drinking, it was going to kill him. He told me I was a nagging shrew who did not understand anything. He left the house and did not come back until late. The next morning I woke up early to start breakfast. Thomas was still in bed, which was unusual because he was normally up before dawn. I went about my routine, assuming he was sleeping off another night of drinking." Her hands tightened around her coffee cup. "Around noon I heard a crash from upstairs, a terrible, awful crash. I ran up and found Thomas at the bottom of the staircase. He must have woken up still drunk or maybe just disoriented and lost his footing. He hit his head on the corner of the banister. There was so much blood." Her voice cracked slightly, the first real emotion breaking through her careful composure. "I ran for the doctor, but it was too late. Thomas was dead before the doctor even arrived. The sheriff came, the coroner came, they examined everything. The coroner said the injury was consistent with a fall, that there were no signs of a struggle or any other trauma. The sheriff found empty bottles in the bedroom, evidence of Thomas's drinking. It was ruled an accident." "But people did not believe it," Samuel said. "People believed what they wanted to believe. Thomas was well liked in town. He was charming when he was sober, friendly, the kind of man people thought they knew. No one wanted to believe he had a drinking problem because he had hidden it so well from everyone except me. So they decided it was easier to believe I had killed him. The fact that he had taken out a life insurance policy became proof of premeditation, even though he had done it on his own without my knowledge. The fact that we had argued became evidence of motive, and the fact that I refused to spend the rest of my life weeping and wearing black became proof that I had no heart." "That is not fair," Samuel said quietly. "No, it is not. But fair has nothing to do with it. This is a small town, Mr. Yates. Small towns need their villains, their cautionary tales, their examples of what happens when a woman steps outside the boundaries of acceptable behavior. I am that example. I am the woman they point to and say, 'See what happens? See what ambition and independence lead to?' It does not matter that none of it is true. The story is more useful than the truth." Samuel sat back, processing everything she had told him. He believed her. Maybe that made him a fool. Maybe he was exactly the kind of gullible man everyone had warned him about, but something in the way she spoke, the exhaustion and resignation in her voice, rang true in a way that gossip never did. "What was in the letter?" he asked, nodding to the crumpled paper she still held. She looked down at it as if she had forgotten it was there. "My landlord is evicting me. He owns the building where my shop is located and the small apartment above it where I live. He says he has received too many complaints from other business owners on the street. He's giving me 30 days to vacate." "Can he do that? Is it legal?" Probably not, but what am I going to do? Hire a lawyer and fight it? I barely make enough to keep the shop running as it is. Most of the women in town refuse to patronize my business, and the ones who do come in secret, afraid to be seen associating with me. I take in mending from the boarding houses and the saloon, alterations for anyone who will pay, but it is not enough. Without the shop, I have nothing. Samuel's mind was already working through possibilities. Could you move the shop? Find another location? Every building in town is owned by men who are either married to women who hate me or friends with men who have decided I'm a threat to the moral fabric of the community. I have asked, no one will rent to me. She set the letter down and met his eyes directly. In 30 days, I will have to leave Carlin. I have some savings, enough to get me to California maybe, or back east. I can start over somewhere else, somewhere no one knows me or cares about Thomas. It is probably for the best. That does not seem right, Samuel said, surprised by the anger he felt on her behalf. You should not have to leave your home because of lies and gossip. Right has nothing to do with survival, Mr. Yates. I have learned that lesson thoroughly over the past 3 years, but I appreciate your concern, truly. And I appreciate what you did for me in the street today. You are a good man, and I hope Carlin treats you better than it has treated me. They finished their breakfast in companionable silence. Samuel paid for the meal over Delilah's objections and walked her back to her shop. As they stood outside the door, she turned to him with a serious expression. Mr. Yates, you should know that being seen with me will damage your reputation in this town. I would not blame you if you decided to keep your distance from now on. In fact, I would encourage it. I will judge people for myself, Mrs. Crawford, Samuel said firmly. I have never been good at letting others make up my mind for me. If you are willing, I would like to call on you again. Maybe we could have dinner, talk more. I am new here and could use a friend, and you seem like you could use one too. She studied him for a long moment, her expression wary but hopeful. Why would you want to associate with me? You have to know what people will say. Let them say what they want. I spent too many years of my life worrying about other people's opinions, doing what I was told, following rules that never made much sense to me. I am done with that. You seem like an honest person who has been dealt a rotten hand. I would like to help if I can. I do not need rescuing. Mr. Yates. Good, because I am not offering to rescue you. I am offering to be your friend. There is a difference. For the first time since he had met her, Delilah Crawford smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face and made her look years younger. In that case, Mr. Yates, I would very much like to have dinner with you. Come by the shop tomorrow evening around 6. I close at 5, which should give me time to make myself presentable. You look presentable right now, Samuel said honestly, and her smile widened. You are either very kind or very blind, Mr. Yates, but either way, I will see you tomorrow. Samuel tipped his hat and headed back to where Rusty was waiting. As he rode back to the Turner Ranch, he could not shake the feeling that he had just committed himself to something complicated and potentially dangerous, but he also could not bring himself to regret it. Delilah Crawford deserved better than what Carlin had given her, and if he could provide even a small measure of that, it seemed worth the risk. The next evening, Samuel arrived at the dress shop precisely at 6, wearing his best shirt and with his hair still damp from the bath he had taken at the boarding house. Delilah met him at the door, and he was struck again by how lovely she was when she was not being hounded by hostile townspeople. She had changed into a dark green dress that brought out the color in her eyes, and her hair was down, falling in waves past her shoulders. I thought we could eat here, she said, leading him up a narrow staircase to her apartment above the shop. It is not much, but it is private, and I am a decent cook when I have the time and ingredients. The apartment was small but immaculately kept, with lace curtains on the windows and simple furniture that looked handmade but sturdy. The main room served as both a sitting area and a dining space, with a small kitchen visible through an open doorway. Delilah had set the table with mismatched china and had flowers in a glass jar as a centerpiece, wildflowers that must have come from outside town. The meal she served was simple but delicious: roasted chicken with vegetables and bread that was still warm from the oven. They ate and talked, carefully at first, then with increasing comfort as the evening progressed. Samuel told her about growing up in Missouri, about his family's small farm, and how he had left home at 18 to seek his fortune out west. He told her about working on cattle drives, about learning to break horses from an old vaquero in Texas, about the friends he had made and lost along the way. Delilah talked about her childhood in Utah, the daughter of a seamstress who had taught her the trade from an early age. She spoke about meeting Thomas when she was 21, about how he had seemed so stable and reliable after a childhood of moving from town to town following her mother's work. She had married him believing she was finally finding security, a permanent home, only to discover that stability was an illusion and home could be taken away as easily as it had been given. I used to think that if I just followed the rules, did what was expected, was a good wife and a respectable woman, then everything would be fine, she said, refilling their coffee cups. But the rules are different for men and women. A man can drink himself to death and people say it is a tragedy. A woman survives her husband's drinking, and people say she is a murderer. There is no winning, not really. You can only choose which way you want to lose. You have not lost, Samuel said firmly. You are still here, still working, still fighting. That takes courage. Or stubbornness. I have never been entirely sure which. They talked long into the evening, the conversation flowing easily between serious topics and lighter ones. Samuel found himself laughing more than he had in months, drawn in by Delilah's sharp wit and the way she could find humor even in difficult circumstances. When he finally stood to leave, aware that it was well past proper calling hours, he found himself reluctant to go. "Thank you for this evening," he said at the door. "I have not enjoyed myself this much in a very long time." "Neither have I," Delilah admitted. "You are easy to talk to, Mr. Yates. That is a rare quality." "Samuel, please. I think we are past formalities at this point." "Then you must call me Delilah. Good night, Samuel." He left, with a lightness in his step that had nothing to do with the wine they had shared with dinner and everything to do with the woman upstairs. Samuel had not come to Carlin looking for romance, but he was beginning to think he might have found it anyway. Over the following weeks, Samuel became a regular visitor to Delilah's shop. He would ride into town after finishing work at the ranch, and they would have dinner together, sometimes in her apartment, sometimes at the Chinese cafe where they had first talked. The gossip in town intensified, as he had known it would, but Samuel found he cared less and less what people thought. Let them talk. Let them speculate. He knew the truth, and that was enough. Daniel Turner, his employer, called him into the ranch office one afternoon about 3 weeks after Samuel had first defended Delilah in the street. Turner was a weathered man in his 50s, successful and shrewd, with the kind of direct manner that Samuel appreciated. "Yates, I have been hearing things in town about you and the Crawford widow," Turner said without preamble. "I expect you have, sir. People are saying you are courting her, that you are making a fool of yourself over a woman with a questionable past. They are asking me why I continue to employ someone with such poor judgment." Samuel kept his expression neutral. "What do you say when they ask you that, sir?" Turner leaned back in his chair and studied Samuel for a long moment. "I tell them that who you spend your time with is your own business, provided it does not interfere with your work. I also tell them that Delilah Crawford was cleared of any wrongdoing in her husband's death by every official who investigated it, and that small-minded gossip is not evidence of guilt. But I wanted to hear from you directly. Are you serious about this woman?" "I believe I am, sir." "Do you believe she is innocent of the accusations people make against her?" "I do. I have spent considerable time with her, and I have seen no evidence of anything except a woman trying to survive in a town that has decided she is guilty without any proof." Turner nodded slowly. "My wife was friends with Thomas Crawford. She says he had a drinking problem that most people did not know about. She also says that Delilah tried everything she could to help him, and that his death was a tragedy but not a crime. I trust my wife's judgment. If you are serious about Mrs. Crawford, you have my support for what it is worth." Relief washed over Samuel. "Thank you, sir. That means a great deal." "Do not thank me yet. You are going to face considerable opposition from the people in town. Mrs. Turner and I can provide some cover, but there are limits to what we can do. Are you prepared for that?" I am. Then good luck to you, son. You are going to need it. Samuel left the meeting feeling both encouraged and apprehensive. He had Turner's support, which was valuable, but he knew the battle ahead was far from over. That evening, when he went to see Delilah, he told her about the conversation. "You could lose your job over me," she said, her face troubled. "Turner just told me I would not." "Today. But what about tomorrow, or next week, or next month? Samuel, you need to think about this carefully. Associating with me is already affecting your reputation. If you continue, if we become more serious, it will only get worse. People will refuse to do business with you. They will treat you the way they treat me. Is that really what you want?" Samuel took her hands in his, feeling the roughness of her fingers from years of sewing. "What I want is to spend time with a woman I find fascinating and intelligent and brave. What I want is to see where this goes between us without worrying about what a bunch of hypocrites and gossips think. Delilah, I am not a boy. I am 26 years old, and I have seen enough of the world to know when something is worth fighting for. You are worth fighting for." Her eyes filled with tears, and she blinked them away quickly. "I have not had anyone fight for me in a very long time." "Then it is about time someone did." He kissed her then, a soft, gentle kiss that tasted of salt from her tears and promise of something more. When they pulled apart, Delilah was smiling despite the wetness on her cheeks. "I am falling in love with you," she whispered. "I did not mean to, did not plan for it, but I am." "Good," Samuel said, pulling her close, "because I am falling in love with you too." The eviction deadline was approaching rapidly, and despite Samuel's best efforts, he had been unable to find anyone willing to rent space to Delilah. He spent hours talking to property owners, appealing to their sense of fairness, offering to pay extra rent, but every door closed in his face. The prejudice against her ran too deep, fueled by years of gossip and the town's need for a villain. 10 days before the eviction was set to take effect, Samuel was working with a particularly difficult horse in the Turner Ranch corral, when an idea struck him with such clarity that he nearly lost his grip on the lead rope. He finished up quickly, cleaned himself up, and rode directly to the Turner Ranch house. Mrs. Turner received him in the parlor, a kind-faced woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes. Samuel had met her several times and liked her immediately, sensing in her the same practical decency that her husband possessed. "Mrs. Turner, I need to ask you something, and I hope you will be honest with me. Did you know Thomas Crawford well?" "I did," she said carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Because everyone in town seems convinced that his wife killed him, but you are one of the few people who has not joined that chorus. I need to know what you know about what really happened." Mrs. Turner was silent for a moment, then gestured for him to sit. "Thomas Crawford was a troubled man, Mr. Yates. He came from a good family back east, had a good education, but he had demons that he tried to drown in alcohol. When he was sober, he was charming and capable. When he was drunk, he was someone else entirely. Delilah did her best to manage the situation, to keep his drinking private so it would not cost him his job, but it was a losing battle." "Why has no one else acknowledged this?" "Because admitting Thomas had problems would mean admitting that they did not notice, did not help, did not do anything while a man in their community slowly destroyed himself. It is easier to blame Delilah, to make her the villain, than to accept their own failure to see what was happening. It is cowardice dressed up as morality." "Would you be willing to say that publicly? To tell people what you just told me?" Mrs. Turner's expression became wary. "To what purpose?" "To help clear Delilah's name. To give her a chance at having a normal life in this town." "Mr. Yates, I admire your intentions, but you must understand that speaking publicly would put me at odds with nearly every woman in Carlin. I would be ostracized from my social circles, criticized, possibly worse." "I understand, madam, and I would not ask if there were any other option. But Delilah is being evicted in 10 days. She is going to have to leave town, start over somewhere else, all because people would rather believe a comfortable lie than an uncomfortable truth. If you could help, if you could give people permission to see her differently, it might change everything." Mrs. Turner stood and walked to the window, looking out over the ranch. When she turned back, her expression was resolute. "My husband and I have lived according to our principles for 30 years, Mr. Yates. I would be a hypocrite if I abandoned them now for the sake of social convenience. I will speak with some of the other women in town, the ones I believe might listen to reason. I cannot promise it will change anything, but I will try." "Thank you, madam. That is all I can ask." Mrs. Turner was true to her word. Over the next week, Samuel heard reports that she had hosted a tea at the ranch house, inviting several of the town's prominent women. He did not know what was said at that gathering, but the temperature in town seemed to shift slightly. People were still not friendly to Delilah, but the open hostility lessened. A few women began shopping at her store again, not many, but enough that she had steady work for the first time in months. The landlord, however, remained unmoved. Samuel confronted him 3 days before the eviction date, finding him at the saloon nursing a whiskey and looking uncomfortable under Samuel's steady gaze. "Mr. Palmer, I want to talk to you about Delilah Crawford's eviction." Palmer shifted in his seat. "It is a done deal, Yates. Nothing to talk about." "Who pressured you into this? Was it Mrs. Henderson, the other business owners?" "Nobody pressured me. I make my own decision." "Right, and your decision just happened to coincide with a campaign to drive Mrs. Crawford out of town. That seems convenient." Palmer's face reddened. "Look, I do not have anything against the woman personally, but business is business." The other shop owners threatened to take their concerns to the railroad office, said they would make trouble for my other properties if I did not handle the situation. I cannot afford that kind of problem. "So you would rather destroy an innocent woman's livelihood than stand up to bullies." "Easy for you to say. You do not have a wife and children depending on you. You do not have property that could be seized or damaged if you make the wrong people angry." Samuel bit back his frustration. Anger would not help the situation. "What if I found someone to take over the lease, someone the other business owners could not object to?" Palmer looked skeptical. "Like who?" "Like me." The older man's eyebrows rose. "You want to lease a dress shop?" "I want to lease the building. What happens inside it is Mrs. Crawford's business. I will pay the rent, sign the lease, and take full responsibility for the property. You can tell the other business owners that you solved the problem. Mrs. Crawford is no longer your tenant." "I am." Palmer considered this, turning his whiskey glass in his hands. "The other owners might not like it, but they cannot object to you personally. You work for Turner, and nobody wants to cross him. And if you are willing to sign a year's lease up front with 3 months' payment in advance, I suppose we could make that work." 3 months' advance rent would take nearly all of Samuel's savings, money he had been carefully putting aside for his own future. But as he looked at Palmer's calculating expression, he knew it was the only way to keep Delilah in Carlin, to give her the chance she deserved. "Draw up the papers," Samuel said. "I will have the money tomorrow." He told Delilah that evening, finding her in the shop as she packed up her belongings in preparation for the move she thought was inevitable. When he explained what he had done, she stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot do that. That is all your savings. That is your future." "My future is what I make of it. If I want to spend my money keeping you in Carlin, that is my choice." "Samuel, this is too much. I cannot accept this kind of sacrifice from you." "It is not a sacrifice if I am doing it willingly. Delilah, I love you. I want a future with you here in this town or anywhere else you want to be, but I believe Carlin is your home, and you should not have to leave it because of prejudice and gossip. Let me do this. Let me help." She was crying openly now, not bothering to hide her tears. "I do not deserve you." "You deserve so much more than what you have gotten. Let me give you this one thing." She came to him then, wrapping her arms around him and holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had gone unstable. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you so much." Samuel signed the lease the next day and handed over the money that represented months of hard work and careful saving. It hurt to see it go, but the look on Delilah's face when he told her the shop was secure made it worthwhile. They celebrated quietly that evening in her apartment, and for the first time since coming to Carlin, Samuel felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The town's attitude toward Delilah began to change slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, then with gathering momentum. Mrs. Turner's influence opened doors that had been firmly closed, and other women began to follow her lead. It helped that Delilah was an excellent dressmaker, better than anyone else in town, and women who had been making do with inferior work from other seamstresses began to remember why they had patronized her shop in the first place. Samuel continued working at the Turner Ranch, but he spent every free moment with Delilah. They became a familiar sight in Carlin, walking together down Main Street, eating at the Chinese cafe, attending church services where they sat together in the back pew and ignored the disapproving stares. Gradually, the stares became less frequent, replaced by cautious nods and, eventually, tentative greetings. It was not a complete transformation. There were still people like Mrs. Henderson who refused to acknowledge Delilah's existence, who crossed the street to avoid passing her on the boardwalk. But the wall of hostility that had surrounded her began to develop cracks, and through those cracks came the possibility of a normal life. 6 months after Samuel first arrived in Carlin, he asked Delilah to marry him. It was not a grand gesture or an elaborate proposal, just the two of them sitting on her apartment steps watching the sun set over the Nevada desert, his hand in hers and his heart full of certainty. "I know it has not been very long," he said, "and I know that marrying me will not solve all your problems in this town. But I love you, Delilah. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me. Will you marry me?" She turned to him, her hazel eyes reflecting the orange and pink of the sunset. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 2 months later in a small ceremony at the Turner's ranch house, with Daniel and his wife standing as witnesses. Delilah wore a dress she had made herself, pale blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes, and Samuel wore the suit he had purchased specially for the occasion, his first new suit in 5 years. The minister who performed the ceremony was from a neighboring town, brought in because Carlin's own minister had refused on the grounds that he could not in good conscience marry a woman of questionable morals. Samuel had not cared about the minister's objections. He cared only about the moment when Delilah became his wife, when they spoke their vows and promised to love each other through whatever challenges came their way. When he kissed her for the first time as her husband, he felt a completeness he had not known he was missing. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, a property that Samuel purchased with a loan from Daniel Turner. It was not large or grand, just 3 rooms and a porch that overlooked the desert, but it was theirs, a space where they could build the future they both wanted. Delilah continued to run her dress shop, which became increasingly successful as more women overcame their prejudices and recognized her talent. Samuel continued to work with horses at the Turner Ranch, gaining a reputation as one of the best horse breakers in northern Nevada. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. There were still people in town who made their disapproval known, still women who refused to shop at Delilah's store, still men who made crude comments about Samuel's choice of wife. But they faced these challenges together, drawing strength from each other and from the growing circle of friends who accepted them for who they were rather than judging them based on old gossip. Mrs. Turner became a close friend to Delilah, as did several other women in town who had been convinced by her example to give Delilah a fair chance. Samuel developed a friendship with Daniel Turner that went beyond employer and employee, built on mutual respect and shared values. Slowly but surely, they were building a life in Carlin that felt stable and secure. Delilah became pregnant in the spring of their 2nd year of marriage. Samuel had never thought much about having children, but the moment she told him, something shifted inside him. He was going to be a father. He was going to have a family of his own, something he had never quite believed would happen. "Are you happy?" Delilah asked, watching his face anxiously. "I know we did not plan this quite so soon." "Happy does not begin to cover it," Samuel said, pulling her into his arms. "I am terrified and excited and grateful all at once. We are going to have a baby, Delilah, our baby." She laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Delilah suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and the Nevada heat made the later months uncomfortable. But she continued working in the shop as long as she could, determined not to lose the business she had worked so hard to build. Samuel hired a young woman named Clara to help in the shop, giving Delilah someone to train who could keep things running once the baby arrived. Their son was born on a cold December morning in 1884, arriving 3 weeks early and making his presence known with a lusty cry that brought tears of joy to both parents. They named him Thomas, after Delilah's first husband, a decision that surprised many people in town but felt right to both of them. It was a way of acknowledging the past without being trapped by it, of honoring the good in Thomas Crawford while moving forward into a new future. Samuel held his son for the first time and felt his entire world reorganize itself around this tiny, red-faced creature. He made silent promises to this child, vows to be a better father than his own had been, to provide stability and love and the kind of home where a boy could grow up feeling safe and valued. Delilah watched him with their son, and her expression was soft with love. "You are going to be an amazing father." "I am going to try," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the last remnants of hostility toward Delilah faded away. It was hard to maintain anger toward a woman who was clearly a devoted mother, who could be seen walking through town with her husband and child, looking like any other happy family. The people of Carlin gradually accepted what Samuel had known from the beginning, that Delilah Crawford Yates was not a murderess or a villain, but simply a woman who had survived tragedy and built a new life from the ashes. By the time Thomas was 2 years old, Delilah's dress shop was the most successful business of its kind in the region. She had 3 women working for her now, and she took commissions from as far away as Elko and Reno. Samuel had purchased his own small ranch with Turner's help, focusing on breeding and training horses rather than cattle. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, with enough money to save for the future, and enough work to keep them busy. They added to their family in 1887 when Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, and she wrapped Samuel around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Thomas, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help take care of her. Samuel watched his family grow and thrive and felt a contentment he had never imagined possible. The years of drifting and searching for purpose seemed like someone else's life now. This was his life. These people were his people, and every morning he woke up grateful for the chance he had taken on a widow everyone warned him to avoid. One evening, when Thomas was 6 and Rose was 3, Samuel and Delilah sat on their porch watching the children play in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, and the air was finally cooling after another hot day. "Do you ever regret it?" Delilah asked quietly. "Coming to my defense that day in the street? Fighting for me when everyone said you were making a mistake?" Samuel took her hand, feeling the calluses that years of sewing had left on her fingers. "Not for a single moment. You were the best mistake I ever made, though I never thought of you as a mistake. More like the best decision I ever made." "I was so angry at this town for so long," Delilah said. "Angry at the people who judged me. Angry at the circumstances that put me in that position. But if none of that had happened, I never would have met you, so maybe it was all worth it in the end." "Everything that came before led us to each other," Samuel agreed. "The good and the bad, the struggles and the victories. It all matters because it brought us here." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children and listening to the sounds of the desert evening. Thomas was teaching Rose how to skip stones, even though there was no water nearby, and their laughter carried on the breeze. Samuel thought about the man he had been when he first rode into Carlin, tired and aimless and searching for something he could not name. He had found it here, in a woman everyone said was dangerous, in a love everyone said was doomed. The next year brought new challenges when a harsh winter killed off some of their livestock and damaged part of the house. Samuel worked extra hours to make up the losses, and Delilah took on additional commissions, but they weathered the difficulties together as they had always done. By spring, They had recovered and were planning an addition to the house, a larger bedroom for the children, and a proper office for Delilah's business records. Daniel Turner passed away suddenly in 1890, a blow that hit Samuel hard. Turner had been more than an employer. He had been a mentor and a friend, one of the first people in Carlin to see Samuel and Delilah as individuals rather than as subjects for gossip. Samuel served as a pallbearer at the funeral and spoke about Turner's kindness and integrity, how he had given a drifting cowboy a chance and supported a friendship when others counseled against it. Mrs. Turner sold the ranch after her husband's death, deciding to move back east to be closer to her children. Before she left, she had tea with Delilah one last time, and the two women sat in Delilah's parlor talking about how much had changed since that first difficult year. "I am glad I spoke up for you," Mrs. Turner said. "It was the right thing to do, and I am proud that I did it. You and Samuel have built something beautiful together, and this town is better for having you both in it." "I would not have survived without your support," Delilah said honestly. "You gave other people permission to see me differently, to question their assumptions. I will always be grateful for that." "You survived because you are strong, and because Samuel was smart enough to see past the gossip. I just helped smooth the way a little. Take care of each other, my dear. True love is rare enough that it should be treasured." They embraced, both women crying a little, and then Mrs. Turner was gone, another link to the past severed. Life continued in its steady rhythm. Thomas grew tall and strong, interested in horses like his father, spending his afternoons after school helping at the ranch. Rose was creative and artistic, constantly drawing and designing clothes, showing early signs of inheriting her mother's talent for sewing. In 1892, Delilah gave birth to another son, whom they named Daniel, in honor of the man who had helped them so much. Baby Daniel was calm and thoughtful, a contrast to his energetic older siblings. Samuel was 36 now, no longer the young cowboy who had ridden into Carlin full of restless energy and vague dreams. He was a husband, a father, a respected businessman in the community. The lines around his eyes came from squinting into the sun and from laughter, and the gray starting to show in his hair made him look distinguished rather than old. He was happy in a way he had never expected to be, content with the simple pleasures of family and work and watching the desert change through the seasons. Delilah was 39, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her face marked by the years but still beautiful to Samuel's eyes. She had softened over time, the hard edges of pain and anger worn away by love and acceptance. Her shop was well established. Her reputation as a skilled dressmaker spread throughout the region. Young women came to apprentice with her, hoping to learn her techniques, and she was patient and generous with her knowledge. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Delilah to San Francisco for a week, their first real trip away from Carlin since they had married. They left the children with neighbors and traveled by train, watching the landscape change from desert to mountains to the green hills of California. In San Francisco, they stayed in a real hotel, ate at fancy restaurants, and walked along the waterfront holding hands like young sweethearts. "This is wonderful," Delilah said as they watched the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. "But I miss the children. Is that strange?" "Not strange at all. I miss them too. But it is nice to have this time, just the two of us, to remember who we were before we were parents." "I was angry and alone, and convinced that happiness was something that happened to other people," Delilah said. "Now look at me. Look at us. Samuel, you gave me my life back. You gave me hope when I thought I had none left." "You gave me purpose," Samuel replied. "I was drifting before I met you, going through the motions but not really living. You made me want to be better, to fight for something, to build something lasting. Everything good in my life started the day I decided to judge you for myself instead of listening to gossip." They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had survived doubt and prejudice and hardship. When they returned to Carlin, they were greeted by their children running out to meet them, all three talking at once about everything that had happened while they were gone. Samuel lifted Rose onto his shoulders and took Daniel's hand, while Thomas walked beside Delilah, telling her about a new foal that had been born at the ranch. This was home, Samuel thought. Not the place, but the people, the family they had created together. The years passed, marked by the steady accumulation of small joys and minor sorrows. Thomas grew into a young man, working full-time on the ranch and courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Rose developed into a talented designer, helping her mother with increasingly complex commissions. Daniel showed an aptitude for business, keeping the books for both the dress shop and the horse ranch with a precision that impressed everyone. In 1898, when Samuel was 42 and Delilah was 45, they celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary with a party at their house. Half the town came, including many of the same people who had once crossed the street to avoid Delilah. Mrs. Henderson was there, now elderly and mellowed, and she approached Delilah with an apology that was 16 years overdue. "I was wrong about you, Mrs. Yates. I let prejudice and gossip cloud my judgment, and I am sorry for the pain I caused you. You are a good woman, and you have been a credit to this community. I hope you can forgive an old fool her past mistakes." Delilah, gracious in victory, accepted the apology with dignity. "We were all younger then, Mrs. Henderson. Water under the bridge." Samuel watched this exchange with satisfaction. It had taken years, but Delilah had finally received the vindication she deserved. The woman everyone had warned him to avoid had become one of the most respected members of Carlin, proof that judgment based on truth was always more reliable than judgment based on gossip. Thomas married in 1900, bringing a sweet young woman named Emma into the family. They settled on a piece of land adjacent to Samuel's ranch, building their own home and starting their own herd. Within a year, they had made Samuel and Delilah grandparents, a development that delighted them both. Samuel held his grandson and marveled at the passage of time, how quickly life moved from one generation to the next. Rose married in 1903, wedding a young lawyer who had moved to Carlin to establish his practice. She continued to work with her mother, now a full partner in the dress shop rather than an assistant. The shop's sign was changed to read Crawford and Yates Fine Dressmaking, and mother and daughter worked side by side, creating beautiful garments for women throughout Nevada. Daniel, the youngest, announced his intention to attend college back east, wanting to study business and finance. It was a bold move for a boy from a small Nevada town, but Samuel and Delilah supported his ambitions, proud that their son had dreams that reached beyond Carlin's boundaries. They sold some land to pay for his tuition, considering it an investment in his future. In 1905, Samuel turned 49 and Delilah turned 52. They had been married for 18 years, together for nearly 20, and Samuel loved her more than he had on the day they wed. Her hair was completely silver now, her hands marked by arthritis that made sewing difficult, but to him she was as beautiful as she had been that first day in the street when she had held her head high despite the abuse being hurled at her. They celebrated her birthday quietly, just the two of them, since the children were all occupied with their own lives. As they sat on their porch watching another desert sunset, Delilah leaned her head on Samuel's shoulder. "Do you remember when you first came to my defense?" she asked. "Well, when you told those women you would judge me for yourself?" "I remember every moment of that day. I thought you were either brave or foolish. Maybe both." "Definitely both," Samuel agreed with a laugh. "I am glad you were. Glad you were brave enough and foolish enough to see past what everyone told you and make your own decision. My life would have been so different if you had just ridden past that day, if you had kept your thoughts to yourself. I am glad I did not. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Delilah. Then, now, always." She turned to kiss him, a soft kiss that tasted of coffee and contentment. "I love you, Samuel Yates." "I love you too, Delilah Crawford Yates." They sat together as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, two people who had defied expectations and built a life worth living. The town that had once condemned Delilah now celebrated her. The man everyone warned would regret his choice had never regretted it for a single moment. Their love story had started with judgment and gossip, but it had become something beautiful and lasting, proof that courage and compassion could overcome prejudice and fear. In the years that followed, they continued to build their legacy. The horse ranch prospered, with Thomas managing it alongside his father. The dress shop became a regional destination, with women traveling from as far away as Salt Lake City for Rose and Delilah's designs. Daniel graduated from college with honors and returned to Carlin to establish his own business, helping local ranchers and merchants with financial planning and investments. Samuel and Delilah became the patriarch and matriarch of a large, sprawling family. They had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren, who would sit on their laps and listen to stories about the old days when Carlin was just a dusty railroad town and their great-grandmother was the widow everyone said to avoid. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the town of Carlin threw them a celebration in the church where they had been refused a wedding ceremony. The current minister, a younger man who had moved to town long after the scandal of Thomas Crawford's death, gave a speech about how Samuel and Delilah represented the best of what marriage could be: partnership, loyalty, love that endured through challenges and grew stronger with time. Samuel stood to speak, looking out at the crowd of faces, many of them people who had warned him away from Delilah all those years ago. He thought about the journey they had been on together, the struggles and triumphs, the moments of doubt, and the certainty that had always pulled them through. When I came to Carlin in 1882, I was a man without much purpose or direction. I was looking for work, looking for a place to settle, but I did not know I was also looking for love. Delilah taught me what it means to see people for who they really are rather than who others say they are. She taught me courage and resilience and the value of fighting for what matters. Our 25 years together have been the best years of my life, and I look forward to however many more we are blessed to share. Delilah stood beside him, her hand in his, her eyes bright with tears of joy. Samuel gave me back my life when I thought it was over. He saw me when everyone else looked away. He believed in me when no one else did. He taught me that love does not always come easy or simple, but that it is worth fighting for, worth defending, worth building a life around. I am grateful every day that he decided to judge me for himself. They kissed to applause and cheers, and the celebration continued late into the evening. There was music and dancing, and Samuel and Delilah danced together the way they had at their wedding, moving in perfect synchronization, 2 people who had learned each other's rhythms over years of partnership. As they grew older, they slowed down but never stopped. Samuel continued to work with horses until his 60s, then transitioned to advisory roles, teaching younger men the skills he had spent a lifetime perfecting. Delilah had to give up sewing when her arthritis became too severe, but she remained involved in the dress shop, offering design advice and managing the business aspects with Daniel's help. They took pride in watching their family grow and flourish. Thomas and Emma had 5 children who all learned the horse business. Rose and her husband had 3 daughters who all showed artistic talent. Daniel married later in life, wedding a woman he met in college, and they had twin sons who were as clever and ambitious as their father. In 1912, Samuel turned 56 and Delilah turned 60. They had been married for 25 years, and Samuel could barely remember what his life had been like before her. She was woven into every part of his existence, every memory worth keeping, every moment of happiness. They were sitting on their porch one evening, the same porch where they had spent countless hours over the years, when Delilah said, "I never thought I would live to see 60. After Thomas died, when everyone turned against me, I honestly thought about ending it all. The pain was so overwhelming, the loneliness so crushing. I did not think I had anything left to live for." Samuel's hand tightened on hers. "I'm glad you held on. Glad you kept fighting." "So am I. Because if I had given up, I never would have met you. Never would have had our children, our grandchildren, this beautiful life we built together. All the pain was worth it because it led me to you." "And all my wandering was worth it because it led me to you," Samuel replied. "I spent years looking for something without knowing what I was searching for. Then I found you, and suddenly everything made sense." They sat in companionable silence. 2 people who had learned that the best conversations were sometimes the ones that required no words. The desert spread out before them, eternal and unchanging, while their own lives continued to evolve and grow. Samuel thought about the young man he had been riding into Carlin with nothing but hope and determination, and he felt profound gratitude for every choice that had led him to this moment, to this woman, to this life. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of family and community. They attended weddings and funerals, celebrated births and mourned losses, watched as Carlin grew from a small railroad town into a more established community. Through it all, Samuel and Delilah remained the bedrock of their family, the example that everyone else looked to for guidance and inspiration. In 1920, they celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary. Samuel was 64, Delilah was 67, and they had been together for nearly 40 years. Their children were all grown with families of their own. Their grandchildren were starting to marry and have children, and the legacy they had built together was secure. They returned to San Francisco for their anniversary, recreating the trip they had taken years earlier. The city had changed dramatically, grown larger and more modern, but the ocean was still the same, still crashing against the shore in its eternal rhythm. They walked along the beach, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in the way that only people who had spent decades together could be. "I've been thinking about Thomas lately," Delilah said as they watched the sunset. "My first husband, I mean. I think I have finally forgiven him for the pain he caused, for the choices he made that led to his death. It took me a long time to get there, to separate the man I loved from the disease that consumed him, but I think I have made peace with all of it now." "That is good," Samuel said gently. "He was a part of your life, a part of your story. It is right that you remember him with compassion. I used to worry that loving you meant betraying his memory, but I realize now that love is not finite. We do not run out of it just because we have given it before. I loved Thomas, and I love you. And those two things do not contradict each other. They are just different chapters in the same book. Delilah Crawford Yates, you are the wisest woman I know." She laughed, the sound as bright and lovely as it had been when they first met. Flattery will get you everywhere. Samuel Yates. They returned to Carlin refreshed and ready to embrace whatever time they had left together. Samuel's health began to decline in his late 60s, his joints aching from decades of hard physical labor, his heart occasionally skipping beats in a way that concerned the doctor. But he remained active, still working with horses when he could, still spending every possible moment with Delilah and their ever-expanding family. Delilah's health was better, her mind sharp, and her spirit undiminished despite the physical limitations that age brought. She continued to be involved in the dress shop, now run entirely by Rose and her daughters, and she took pride in seeing the business she had built from nothing continue to thrive. In 1925, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. It was a grand affair with the entire town invited and family members traveling from across the country to attend. Samuel was 69, Delilah was 72, and they stood before their assembled loved ones feeling blessed beyond measure. Their oldest grandson, Thomas, and Emma's eldest boy, gave a speech about what his grandparents meant to the family. "They taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice, a commitment you make every day. They taught us that standing up for what is right matters more than fitting in with the crowd. They taught us that second chances are possible, that redemption is real, and that courage and kindness can change the world. We are all better people because they loved each other and let us witness that love." Samuel found himself crying openly, unashamed of the tears that ran down his weathered face. Delilah cried too, leaning against him for support, overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection from the people they loved most. That evening, after everyone had gone home, and they were alone in the house that had been their sanctuary for so many years, Samuel and Delilah lay in bed together, her head on his chest, his arms around her. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "Not a single one," she replied. "You?" "Only that I did not find you sooner. But I would not change anything else. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, it all led us here, to this life we built together. I would do it all again exactly the same way." "So would I," Delilah whispered. "So would I." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms. Two people who had defied expectations and created something beautiful. Samuel Yates had ridden into Carlin, Nevada in 1882 looking for work and a fresh start. He had found those things, but he had also found something infinitely more valuable, a love worth fighting for, a woman worth defending, and a life worth living. When everyone warned him to avoid the widow with the scandalous past, he had said he would judge her for himself. It was the best decision he ever made. The years stretched ahead of them still, filled with more grandchildren and great-grandchildren, more sunsets watched from their porch, more quiet moments of connection that required no words. They had started as strangers, become friends, transformed into lovers, and evolved into partners who could not imagine existence without each other. Their love story was not perfect or easy, but it was real and lasting and true, and in the end, that was all that mattered.